So let's talk about Harry Blackstone. This right here is a photograph of Harry Blackstone. Now you might be wondering why I'm talking about Harry Blackstone. I never knew Harry Blackstone. I never saw him perform, but my father did. And my father was extremely influential on me growing up. One of the decisive factors in my entering the field of magic was the descriptions that he gave me of the Blackstone show. So if I'm exploring influences on my life, if I didn't talk about Harry Blackstone, I'd be missing one of the great influences on me indirectly. When my dad was a kid, I don't know how old he was, but I know that he was a child, his sister was a child. His father, Raymond Dellman, used to be a traveling salesperson. He would spend most of the week out traveling. He was selling Wilcox and Gibbs sewing machines. And so he'd go out and he'd sell and he'd sell and he'd come back on the weekend, and he wanted to do something fun for the family. And one of the things that he did was he took the family to see the Blackstone show. I don't know how many times my dad saw the Blackstone show, but I can tell you that growing up, he loved to talk about it. He never stopped talking about it. So Blackstone was a huge influence on me. If you want more information about Harry Blackstone, I recommend this book right here. It is truly, I mean, if you like biography, even if you don't like magicians, if you like biography, this is a great biography. I recommend that you read it. There are a couple of stories that are from this book, and there are lots of great stories in the book, by the way. The book features some incredible photographs of the life and times of Harry Blackstone. So I'm a book person. So get out there and read. That's what I suggest that you do. But and this was a great read. I mean, this is one of the books that you pick up and you start reading and you do not want to put down. I was late to work, I don't know how many times, because I was reading this book. So so it's fantastic. I love it, and you will too if you pick it up and read it, even if you're not that interested in magicians. But I've read a lot of magician biographies, and this is easily one of the best. It's full of great anecdotes, great stories, as well as the entire history of Harry Blackstone, how he became Harry Blackstone, all the way on through. Now, he passed away a few years before I was born. So to say that this man had such a profound influence on me is amazing, but he did because of the way he influenced my dad, and probably my grandfather before him. Now, I didn't know my grandfather at the time. That's another story. But my granddad was interested in magic. He would come home, and some of the tricks that he did for Eleanor, my aunt, and for my dad, they would describe to me, and I'm like, wow, fantastic stuff. Now, you're getting secondhand descriptions. I never saw the performance live, but my granddad was a great magician apparently, and my father was highly influenced by him. So they would go to the Blackstone show, and I heard about the Blackstone show. I'm going to tell you about it in a few minutes. Harry Blackstone is arguably one of the grandfathers of our business, and he probably was definitely part of the golden age. Now, to me, the golden age is the Victorian era and into the vaudeville era. That's the golden age, and I think it's golden age for a couple of reasons, but something I'm going to explore in another video is vaudeville and the influence of vaudeville on magic as a performing art. I mean, you can't find today, with the possible exception of Las Vegas or Reno or one of the resort areas, you can't find magicians performing 3-4 shows a day in front of a live audience. It just doesn't happen. But in the vaudeville time, this was the primary means of entertainment, and a magician could sign on a vaudeville circuit and perform every day in front of a live audience, at least once a day, sometimes 3-4 times a day in front of a live audience. And that tended to make one great in terms of performing art, in terms of perfecting one's skill and ability. Cardini, for example, is reported today, and again, you can see Cardini's act on YouTube. You can search it out, you can find it. You can find some of the Blackstone material on YouTube, but you know, when you watch it, it's hard to project yourself back into the theater. But the point is that performance after performance after performance, it gave an artist an opportunity to perfect what they were doing. And so there's no substitute for performing. And the people that were fortunate enough to work the vaudeville circuits had ample opportunity to perform. And this is why, I think, one of the reasons why they became so good at what they did, and why it's referred to as the Golden Age. And we've inherited a lot of that. We've built upon it. I recently saw someone performing. I saw their video, some of their video work on YouTube. I've seen them perform, and I said, you know what, you guys are ushering in a new Golden Age because of the skill that they're bringing to the table. Anyway, back to Blackstone. In this book, there's lots of stories, but I want to highlight two in particular. One was the rivalry between Blackstone and Houdini. Now, I say rivalry, these guys were great friends, they were all great friends, but really in this period of time, you had Harry Houdini, you had Howard Thurston, and you had Harry Blackstone. And those were your big three hitters. Now, you had a lot of other performers, there were a lot of other people working, there are a lot of other names that I could mention. Mike Cabinet publishes biographies of tons of these guys that were working at this period. So I don't want to diminish anyone that was working in that period. There are a lot of great performers, and again, that's why they call it the Golden Age. But the big three were Houdini, Blackstone, and Thurston. Not necessarily in that order. In fact, those of you who know a little bit about magic might think, well, there was nobody greater than Houdini. Maybe, but at the time, Thurston was the top dog. He was the top performer. He was the top grosser. He had the biggest show. And everybody else was more or less chasing Thurston, Blackstone and Houdini included. So when you weren't the top person, and this is true today as well, when you're not the top person, you tended to look for a specialty area. And for Houdini, that specialty area was escapes. Now Blackstone did what's called a packing case or packing crate, or sometimes overboard box. It's referred to by many names, but what these guys would do is they would come into town. They'd want to, because they didn't get salaries, folks. They didn't get salaries. They generally got a percentage of the box office take. So if they didn't have a good box office, they didn't make a lot of money in that particular town. So they would do publicity stunts in the community to try to raise awareness for the show and draw people into the show. And one of the things that they did was a packing crate escape. Now, there are various ways to do this, but it wasn't. The reason why they call it an overboard box was because very often they would do it on a pier. They would be locked in chains, placed into a crate, and the crate would be tossed into the water. And sometimes the water was freezing cold, and sometimes there were currents, so it was a very dangerous thing to do. But Houdini was famous for it, and Blackstone did it for many, many years. And Houdini actually asked him if he would stop doing it, because Houdini was beginning to specialize in this type of thing. And to the best of my knowledge, Blackstone never did a straitjacket escape, suspended several stories high in the middle of Main Street. Houdini did that, and he did it to great effect. Houdini did a great many things to great effect and drawing publicity to his show, but the packing crate escape was something that Blackstone did routinely. And so Houdini asked him to stop doing it as a publicity stunt, and of course it drew people into the audience, into the theater, so Blackstone did not want to stop doing it. So he continued to do it, and at some point, now according to this author here, this is unverified, so I want to emphasize it's unverified. I don't think it's far-fetched, however. So at some point, Blackstone's packing crate disappears. And so he's having difficulty doing it, and then a little while later, that packing crate with apparently a label inside of it indicating that it was the property of Harry Blackstone, that packing crate was found among Houdini's things. So Houdini fans will say, no, that never happened, but it's consistent with Houdini's personality. It's consistent with what magicians will sometimes do, even today. So I don't doubt the story. I can't prove the story. I don't know anyone who can, but interesting story. But a better story, I think maybe a better story, is 1942. Houdini or Harry Blackstone was playing outside in a town in Illinois, and they did sometimes a number of shows a day. And if they did an early show, particularly on a weekend, they would sometimes refer to this show as a bunny matinee. And the reason they called it that is because for Blackstone anyway, he would give away rabbits during the show, and he would do that because there were a lot of children in the audience. So there were sometimes they referred to as kitty matinees or sometimes bunny matinees, but it was a show that was scheduled earlier in the day. The main show, the full evening show, would be later in the evening for adults and families. But this was a show that was earlier, and it featured a lot of children in the audience. Now, in these days, and unfortunately, if you do a lot of reading about theater in the Victorian period and theater in the 1920s, theater in the 1910s, 1930s, 40s, in that period of time, fires were fires today are extremely hazardous and dangerous. But today you have sprinkler systems in place. In the theaters in those days, they had sometimes curtains that would come down and try to slow the spread of the fire. But when there was a theater fire, that was a serious problem, and it was life-threatening, and a fast, decisive action had to take place. So Harry's out there performing his bunny matinee for an audience full of children, and he gets word that there's a possible fire backstage. Now he knows that he has to clear the theater fast in order to save lives. So he doesn't yell fire. He doesn't yell exit, there's a fire going. He walks out to the audience and he says, I have something special I'd like to show you, ladies and gentlemen. And if you will exit out the side doors, I will show you outside. He said, this is an illusion that cannot be done inside. It can only be done outside for its grandeur. So and he said to them, if anyone's caught running or rushing, I'm going to have you sit back down and you're not going to get to see the illusion. So they very eagerly and very patiently and very orderly made an exit of the theater. And of course, when they got outside, he was able to inform them there was a fire inside, and so he saved a lot of lives that day. And that was Harry Blackstone, folks. Harry Blackstone. So. But I wanted to really talk today about the influence that this man had on me as a performer. Now imagine I'm growing up and you know, my dad, he enjoyed telling stories over and over again. So I would hear the same story time and again. And I enjoyed it. You know, I would actually ask for certain stories to be repeated, because I enjoyed the stories so much. And certainly the Blackstone show was a favorite story of mine. So I'd say, Dad, tell me about Harry Blackstone. And there were two illusions that really stood out in my mind. Now he would tell me about the Hippodrome, the old Hippodrome Theater, and how the orchestra would come up out of the floor. That to me, to my father, that was amazing. And that was another thing about the Blackstone show, and about most of the shows in that period. They performed with a live orchestra. An orchestra, not a band. You know, and they had a cast, a very large cast, working with them. So it was a show. It was a show to see. It was a spectacle. And so my dad would go to see this show with his father. And two of the illusions that stand out to me. One is the floating light bulb. Now this is something that Blackstone is famous for. Nobody else does it. Nobody else can or should do it because it's a signature piece. And that's another thing about the Golden Age and about vaudeville and about being able to perform over and over and over again. Eventually, you develop signature pieces that really stand out. And look at that image. So imagine sitting in a theater, and Harry Blackstone is center stage, and someone brings him a lamp that's lit, and there's an extension cord that runs off stage, and so he turns it on and he turns it off, and you can see that it goes on and off by the switch, and then he turns it on, and he leaves it on, and he unscrews it, and he holds it in his hand, and it remains lit. That's a good trick, but that's not where he stopped. Harry Blackstone floats the lamp. You know, I think, now I'm not sure, but I think he got this idea. Now, Aikido came up with the floating ball, and maybe it existed before Aikido, but he's famous for the floating ball. And so a lot of magicians were doing a floating ball effect. To me, the floating ball, it appealed to me. I saw Doug Henning do it years ago, and it's a great effect. But it hurts because what's the ball? I mean, what's the purpose? Why is it a ball? What's it there for? Is it just there to float? Is it heavy? You don't know much because it's just a silver sphere. But in this case, it's a light bulb. It makes some sense that you have a light bulb, and not only that, but a lit light bulb, especially in a darkened theater, a lit light bulb is visible. So there's a lot of reasons why you might go with a lamp instead of an orb. And so this is what Blackstone did. But so he would float this thing, and according to my dad, now there's some debate, and I didn't see the Blackstone show, the original Blackstone show. According to some people, some historians, it wasn't until Harry Blackstone Jr., who is Harry's son, that the bulb actually went out over the heads of the audience. Now my dad disputes that, and I would dispute that, because growing up, now this was before the Harry Blackstone period, this was in the early 60s, and my dad's telling me these stories. It would have been only 10 years, 15 years after Blackstone's death. So according to my dad, he floated the lamp, the light bulb, the lit light bulb, out over the heads of the audience, and my dad was sitting down in front, and he says that the light bulb came over his head. So here I am, a kid, listening to my dad tell me that a lit light bulb floated literally inches above his head. Well, Dad, could you see any strings attached? No, son. I'm telling you, the light bulb came over my head. So I wonder. That the experience of wonder, which is what magic is all about, folks. Not only did Blackstone create a sense of wonder for my grandfather and my father and my aunt, but he created it for me too. Because I'm hearing now the legend. I'm hearing the story of the show. And I'm in awe of this story. I'm in awe of what my father is telling me. And so